Hey everyone, and welcome to a mini walkthrough of how I created this PBR trim sheet using Substance Painter. Now, I know a lot of you don't have Substance Painter, and it's okay, you can use 3D Coat if you want to. So in this little tutorial, which should last about 6 minutes, we'll talk about how I created this trim sheet, the softwares that I use, and any techniques that I use to prepare for the sculpting process. All of these techniques you're able to get through this tutorial series, and it should help with you after the lesson on Tuesday. So no further ado, let's jump into it and let's start. Okay, let's jump straight into 3ds Max. Now in here we're just going to talk about how I prepared the trim sheet and what we need to focus on before we need to export this into Blender. So here I started with is a plane, and this plane is a 4 by 4 meters. So mine are in centimeters, so it'll be 400 centimeters by 400 centimeters on the height, width, and length. And we have to create two different variations because this plane is going to be our low poly when we bake the high poly onto low poly in Substance Painter. So let's move on to the topology one. So when we are making our trim sheet, we need to make sure that we know which areas we are working with. So I decided that I wanted 2 strips, and I created that just by extruding out certain sections, and I made the topology nice and clean. It is very important that we make our topology nice and clean and ready for when we go into Blender or in 3D Coat, as it needs a clean subdivision, and with a clean subdivision you'll get better results. Okay, so what we're going to talk about is the importance of a trim sheet and why we're using them and how it can benefit your project. So let's start. So we're going to use a trim sheet just like we did in Tuesday's lesson, where we're able to bake all of our maps, and we are able to guide our UV shells in 3ds Max and project them onto a different asset, a different model. And this is a fundamental way of learning how we can create nice looking assets for games and making sure that the file sizes are very low and the computing time is low, which is very important. But just for this lesson, we're just going to export this into Blender, and it's going to be a nice quick tutorial for you, so we're not going straight into depth about a trim sheet. Just to make sure that these are highlights from Tuesday's lesson, and hopefully this will help you understand more about trim sheets and how you can quickly practice them. There you should have a information on trim sheets and additional content, which is on the PowerPoint presentation. So anyway, in this preparation or the planning of a trim sheet, you can see that I've also separated this into section and this into a section. What could help you, which I'm not going to explain further into this, is we're able to separate into different sections, and this may help you in the sculpting process and making sure that your model has different material IDs, which is important when we get into Blender and Substance Painter. So basically that's my planning, and if you wanted to, you could add different bricks and you could create all these different designs. But just for now, I've created this design, these strips, just to make sure that our normal maps can look the way we want to when we go into the baking process in Substance Painter. Okay, so when you're ready and you are certain this is ready and all your topology is nice and clean, you can export this model into Blender using an FBX format. And now we're just going to jump straight into Blender. Okay, so we're in Blender, and in this little part we're just going to show you how I created this sculpt. So when you're ready, you can import your FBX model into Blender just by hitting File, Import in FBX, and then you should see that your model is here with all of the sections that you wanted to use. And in this section, all you need to do is just hit the Dynatopo, and that'll give you some sculpting options where you can go on to constant detail and brush detail, and then we can iterate the subdivision levels just like you did in Mudbox, and we can use the scrape tool and the clay strips and the clay, and that's how I created the detail of this. To create a nice little finish, as this is going to be metal, I want to do some indentations around the surface and add some more wear, and a great brush for that is to use the clay and strips. Nice intricate layers of clay. So when you're ready, you can export this as an FBX and then into Substance Painter. So let's jump straight into Substance Painter. So we're here back in Substance Painter, and as you can see, this is the direction we want to go in for the PBR trim sheet. So when we have done our preparation in 3ds Max and the sculpt in Blender and everything is in FBX and it's exported, you can go into Substance Painter, and we're going to go on File New, and we're going to select our plain low poly bake, which is the plain 2D sheet that we made in 3ds Max. And then we don't need to know anything about this, just make sure that the resolution is set at 248. And I'm going to hit OK. I'm just going to discard this project. Okay. Oops. So now we have our plane in Substance Painter, and we're going to start to get ready for our bake. So all you need to do is just go into the texture settings. Remember, if you don't have Substance Painter, you can do this process in 3D Coat with Baz. So I'm going to go and bake Mesh Maps, and we have the baking dialog box. So first of all, we now know that we have our low poly bake, which is just the plane, because we're going to bake our detail onto a 2D image. And I'm going to hit this little paper icon, and I'm going to select my high poly. So the purpose of this part is that we are going to bake the detail from our high poly sculpt in Blender, and we're going to bake that detail onto this 2D plane, which will then give us a normal map. So to help the process, I'm going to just go on to the frontal distance. So what that means is that if I iterate max frontal distance, it will make sure that the projection of the normal maps is a little bit crisper, and that's what we want, but we need to be careful not to overdo it. So I'm going to set this as a 0.5, or it might be a 0.06, which is a good one. I'm going to go on, press bake. This process can take maybe a minute or so, depending on the speed of your PC. And as you can see, one of our maps is failed, but that doesn't matter because we do not have a ID map like before. If you were in 3ds Max and you wanted to separate the trim sheet planning into sections, and you wanted to add a material, that will make sure that you have an ID map for the individual sections, which is a nice way of doing it. But just for this section, we don't need an ID map. And here we go. So all of the sculpting detail is now been baked onto the 2D image and the plane that we prepared in 3ds Max. And once we go through that, we can just go onto layers, and then we can start adding all of these different material surfaces as a little practice. So I'm going to go for Cobalt Pure. And as you can see, it's filled the colour and the metallic values, and there you go. So this is a great way to start preparing trim sheets and really making sure that your curiosity and your creativity is used, and hopefully in future lessons we'll use this method again and we'll start to look at the versatility of textures and how we can create different assets using a single texture but just changing the overall appearance in Substance Painter. Thank you for watching, and I will see you next time.